Great. Great. We're live now. Hi, I'm Andy Chabot. We're just waiting a few minutes for everybody to sign in. I see attendees joining now, so it'll be just a few minutes and we'll get started, everybody. Right.
Yeah. I'm gonna drink some wine.
This is great. We're about halfway there in participants now. I see that. Just a few more minutes. About 20 more people to join. All right, everybody. By my clock, it's about 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 my time. We're going to wait about another minute or two. We'll get started with the conversation. We have another few more people to join. Okay, I see a few more people joining. We're getting there. About 60 more seconds, one more minute, we'll get rolling here. Okay. A lot of wine sniffing, slurping, swirling sounds going on. I love that. All right, we're at about 7:33 my time, Eastern Standard Time, and I think 4:33 Pacific Time. And I think we're very close in number of participants, and I think it might be great to get started. We have a fun conversation ahead of us. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're all joining us for a couple glasses of wine and a fun conversation tonight. I wanted to welcome you all to this conversation between Littorai Winery and Blackberry Farm, and a conversation that we want to talk about called the long view. This idea of from grape to glass and from farm to table, and how those two concepts run together and parallel and then join each other. And with me today, I'm going to go in the order I see everybody. So in my upper left is Dustin Busby. Dustin, if you wave your hand just so we know who you are. Hey, Dustin. Dustin is the Farmstead manager at Blackberry Farm. He runs all of our garden operations at Blackberry Farm. He runs the livestock operation. I'm sure this morning he was milking sheep, make sheep's milk cheese. He is a Truffle dogs under his umbrella at the farm, and is really just a great manager of all things Farmstead. Moving to my right, I see Ted Lemon here, one of my heroes in the world of food and wine. Hi, Ted. The proprietor, owner, winemaker at Littorai Winery, one of the most intelligent, cerebral winemakers that I know, and certainly is going to send a lot of knowledge, I think, our way this evening. I'm excited about the conversation with Ted. And then, and for me, the bottom left of my screen is Cassidee Dabney. She's the executive chef of the barn at Blackberry Farm. She's going to help us understand how everything comes together at the table and talk through some techniques, I think, of how we can make things come together at the table. Welcome, everybody. And so tonight we're talking about the idea of the two storylines, that of the vineyard and that of the garden and the truffle orchard. Interestingly, we recently planted a truffle orchard at Blackberry Farm, and we thought it would be an interesting time to have this conversation. I want to talk about how those two ideas sort of work together and then come together at the table. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation. But before we do that, everyone on our screen until just a second ago was swirling and sipping and sniffing wine. And we do have a couple of wines in front of us that Ted sent to us here at Blackberry. And if you're lucky enough to have gotten on the list at Littorai and gotten these wines, you probably have 2 wines in front of you as well. And Ted, if you don't mind to intro quickly the wines to us, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Thanks, Andy. So we also said that I'd introduce you, although you introduced yourself. So I'm going to do that. No, that's okay. I'm going to do that. So Andy is, if there's such a thing as a human institution at Blackberry, I'm afraid, Andy, you probably qualify. 18 years of service, food and beverage manager, wine director at Blackberry Farms. And I can only imagine in those 18 years, you've probably done just about everything in an emergency. So I bet you're the jack of all trades when there's a problem. I can only imagine. But we're thrilled to be here with you all today and honored to do this with Blackberry. So I just want to mention that as we get going. And unfortunately, I haven't yet had a chance to try Cassidee's food because I haven't been there since you've been the chef. But hopefully we're all going to be traveling soon and that's going to happen. So I would look forward to that. And I think most of the people on the line probably have the 2 wines together. The Pivot Vineyard, both 2018 and 2016. Please jump in and enjoy those. It's not going to be a formal tasting, so go for it. We're delighted to see everybody saying hello in the chat. And I guess, Andy, the only other thing you wanted to mention maybe was that if you have a real Q question for us, go ahead and drop that into the Q&A, and Andy will kind of manage getting as many questions answered as possible. So we're really looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Ted, I have in my glass right now the 2018 Pivot Vineyard, and I've been going back and forth between the 2, the 15, the 18, and really beautiful wines. I'm excited to see how they sort of evolve, you know, in our glass here. And so as we sort of dive into this, leading up to this for Dustin and Ted, you all had some homework to do, and that was to kind of look inward and to see and think about some quotes that speak to the theme of this topic on the long view. And Dustin, if you don't mind, I'd dive in with you on a quote that resonates with you for this topic.
Yeah, I picked one that resonates with me here at Blackberry, as well as my own personal farm for my family. I have 3 kiddos, and so something that I really love about farming, and especially the way I personally like to farm, as well as we do here at Blackberry, is very much so for the long game, or the not always the easiest, but feels like it fills my cup the most. So I picked a quote by Nelson Henderson. And it says, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees into which the shade you never planned to sit."
That's great.
Is that yours?
I was sorely tempted by a Wendell Berry quote, because Wendell Berry, of course, a very well-known writer of poetry, a farmer, and so I thought of Wendell Berry in the South, but I thought I'd zoom way out, Dustin, and quote a gentleman named Wes Jackson, who founded the Land Institute in Kansas, and he has a great quote I always try to remember, both when we start a project and when we run into problems, which is, he said many years ago now, he said, "Most analyses of problems in agriculture do not deal with the problem of agriculture." And I just love that quote, because it reminds us that when we farm, we shuffle things around and we move things. And so I don't think he was trying to say that agriculture is wrong, because of course we'd all be not eating anything if it's completely wrong. But I think he was trying to say that as we zoom out, whenever we farm, we have to think of, the big picture of what we've changed and how we reestablished balance in our environment. So I always try to remember that, and I was thinking about you when I thought of that one, Dustin, because an orchard's a big change, like a vineyard. It's a big undertaking. So that
Yeah.
that was my quote for us.
I'm glad no one asked me to come up with a quote. You two, so much more intelligent sounding than I would ever be.
Same.
Yeah. So, so I'll just sort of dive in if I can, Ted. You mentioned the orchard, and we are currently at a pivotal time at Blackberry Farm where we are planting a new truffle orchard or replanting an orchard. And Dustin, I wanted, if we could just have you jump in and talk about what is a truffle orchard, and also, why are we replanting a truffle orchard? And I think
so
on the screen are old truffle orchard, perhaps.
that's right. So these are the hazelnut trees that were planted, I believe, back in 2007 now. And so they're much bigger now and grown, and the trees are beautiful. This is one that we actually just planted the new truffle orchard just a couple days ago. And we've switched from hazelnut to a bur oak. Part of our issue with our original truffle orchard is we were hit hard by eastern filbert blight, which is taking out our trees. And so just a quick intro into it. Truffles are ectomycorrhiza fungal that's a fancy way of saying that it's a fungus up under the ground on the roots of the tree. And it's a symbiotic relationship between the two. The fungus is able to pull nutrients that the tree necessarily couldn't get from the soil, micronutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as macronutrients like some iron and things like that. And in return, the tree gives the carbohydrates. And so just like every other mushroom, when it fruits, that's how it's trying to spread its spores and reproduce. And so a truffle fruits into what we know and love as an amazing food, and mostly through animal spreading. Animals will eat it and spread the fungus that way, and it will take over into a new tree and go through that same thing. But all that to say is our hazelnut trees were hit with blight. So when the tree dies, the fungus dies as well. We also learned some other things that when we were very new into the cultivation of truffles, such as distance from other trees, a little bit of light management from the way the light hits the ground and things like that. So our new truffle orchard, we've inoculated native bur oaks with both Tuberous melanosporum, which is the French Perigord truffle, and then also Estavium, which is more of the Burgundy truffle. And so these trees are growing on native bur oaks. So the idea is the native bur oak should do a lot better in our area, and then which in turn should allow the truffles to do a lot better as well.
So Dustin, the first orchard, did the trees never got to maturity? You never got to see whether the inoculation would work, or?
They did. They're mature now. We actually still have a few. We're slowly, as the blight takes over, we're taking them out and replacing them with other perennial fruits, such as this year it's black raspberries. We're also got blueberries and things like that in line. They did produce some, and another, like I was saying, the border issue was another mistake that we made in the beginning, and now that there's a few more cultivation of truffle orchards around, we've learned different things. Having other trees in close proximity can, just the same way we were just talking as animals transfer those funguses, and native truffles, because truffles are everywhere. They're not just the ones that we know of the delicious ones. They can outcompete the ones that we're trying to cultivate. And so our new orchard, we actually have a 100-foot barrier. I think we have a picture of the overall space of the new truffle orchard going in. You can see there's nothing around it anymore. It's a big pasture that we have our sheep in, but no trees and things like that to compete with those truffles. So we found a few native pecan truffles in that orchard, and there's signs that the Tuberous melanosporum spores are still there, but we're losing the trees. So to do what we would need to do to rectify, we'll lose the trees before we could do that in the soil with the truffles themselves. So we're deciding to start over.
Can you eat the pecan truffles, the natives?
You can, yeah. I'll let Cassidee speak to that one, but
You can eat them, but you might not enjoy them.
Tell us about What does that mean? Did you try to cook them? Did you try different preparations? What happens with them?
We treated them just like you would a black truffle, in that we keep them raw and then grate them over things and then hope for the aromatic. And it was a bit unpleasant.
In what way? Come on, you gotta help us out.
It was kind of earthy, funk, maybe like you stepped in something that you shouldn't have.
As we say politely in the wine business, too fecal.
But like,
That's exactly right.
they weren't all terrible. Some of them were actually kind of interesting, but then the interesting ones were more of like a diesel fuel.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of, it seems like domestic truffles suffer from some aromatics that aren't as pleasant, it seems, and really don't have the wonderful ethereal aromatics that we all would like. And Dustin, we also we did get hazelnuts from our hazelnut orchard.
We have, yeah. We've done a lot of hazelnuts, a good amount of hazelnuts that we shell each year. And we use the shells actually for smoking different charcuterie and meats and things like that. And then we use the hazelnuts themselves. So it's definitely not been all a loss. And they're beautiful trees as well. And hazelnuts, the way they grow very quickly, and they do better when you prune them. So we've actually used them for a ton of borders and mulch and all kinds of really great things throughout the garden.
Yeah.
And get truffles, or not a lot of truffles.
Hey,
There was a question in the chat about the climates for truffles. So can you roll 2 questions into that for me?
That's something that's still being explored to some degree. In fact, I believe, and I'm not 100% on the actual statistic data as far as numbers go, but Australia has become one of the biggest producers of cultivated truffles outside of Italy and France. And so the good thing about them is their seasons flip-flop. So we can, Cassidee, I think, can get truffles, winter truffles in the summertime, essentially. And so really it's being explored as to how far it goes. In the United States, they're being grown almost everywhere in the continental United States, as far as I know. I know they're all the way up at Stone Barns and in New York. They're in Kansas and Oregon, California, all Arkansas, yeah, one in Arkansas. So I think it's really more of a management issue as well, of being able to be pivots to some degree, like we did, and switch from a hazelnut to an oak. Now I will say there are some people trying new hazelnut varietals east of the Mississippi that are resistant to the blight, and they're showing good success with those as well. So it's really a lot of different things. The biggest thing that I've personally learned from the truffles is how much lime it takes. Truffles need calcium, and they need a lot of it, especially melanosporum. Our pH our target pH for our soil on the melanosporum is 7.9. So you think neutral is 7, so that's a basic soil. And I mean, at least for us around here where we have a lot of clay, our soil is like 5.8 naturally in a lot of different areas. 5 to 6 is good soil around here. So we've had to lime a lot, and unfortunately our lime that's readily available is dolomitic lime, which is high in magnesium, and that's not good for truffles. The magnesium actually inhibits the calcium intake, which helps them fruit. So it's probably way to know. That's
a really good point. And maybe Andy, you can jump in on this too, because you've probably got a lot more wine degrees than I do. But the soil pH, the acidity or basic quality of the soil, it's really fun to remember that a lot of European viticulture is based on high pH soils, right? So a lot of Europe has, not all by any means, but has high pH soils. A lot of the Americas have, or at least North America, has the opposite, right? We have soils that are very low in pH, and hence the problem you're mentioning, Dustin. But the other question I have, although I'm not expecting you to have the ready answer, is there are parts of the eastern United States that do have that higher pH profile. And it would be really interesting over the really long time horizon to see if those are the ones that end up being most successful with the European crop.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. And I think it's a great point, Ted. And I want to jump in because we have some questions about differences between domestic and European truffles, cultivated truffles, pairings. I want to say we'll talk about the pairings a little bit later to Hoyt, who asked that question. But as far as European truffles, cultivated truffles, domestic truffles, I'd like to clarify, Dustin, if we could, that the cultivated truffles we are talking about are essentially European varieties, and they're different than the domestic wild varieties. And how are those differences manifested? How do they taste? What do they smell like? What are we talking about?
So they are the same as the wild varieties that grow naturally in Perigord and Burgundy, hence the names. Which is Tuberous estevium is the summer truffle, and then Tuberous melanosporum is the Perigord. Now, a lot of Italy and France, and Andy, I know you've been some of the same places I have. A lot of truffle production in all those in the old world countries are actually cultivated now. And it's been that way for a long time now, up until World War I. That's when cultivation of truffles really took a hit because of the war and the destruction of land, and as well as for the longest time, people as they were figuring out how to cultivate truffles, they kept it a secret. They didn't tell anyone. And when everyone died in the war, essentially, like where their spots were died with them, and so a huge hit came in the old war countries, and it's just in the past 30 years just starting to kind of get back into production. Now, the white Alba truffle, the most expensive, the rarest, nobody's really had a good successful run of cultivating those. And so those are still wild in the Marquet and through Piedmonte, that. So
I have a Cassidee question because Dustin just mentioned the diversity of trials in the United States or in North America on truffles. Have you been able to get your hands on cultivated American truffles from different places to get a sense of what they're like or what cooking is like with them?
Yes, I have. Actually, Tom Michaels, was that his name, Dustin? I'm terrible with names.
Yes. No, yeah, that's right.
So Tom Michaels used to stop by the back door around New Year's to sell us his black truffles that he was cultivating in Tennessee. And he always had them segregated into size, texture of the exterior, because some of them are really, really bumpy and some of them are a little bit smoother. And then you could smell the difference in the truffles that he cultivated from his orchard. And those were radically different, and they were from the same place. And then I will say Oregon truffles, as much as I want to enjoy them, I'm typically fairly disappointed in them, as well as Australian truffles. And then also the Alba white truffles, most of them, do they even come from Italy? Don't they come from like Croatia and southern Hungary?
I think they're a different kind, other than, as far as I know, I truthfully haven't bought truffles in a long time. So, but
all of my truffle mongers have stopped calling them Alba white truffles and started telling me where they're from. And the past 2 years, I've been getting most of my truffles from Croatia or Hungary or what's that other country? Starts with an S.
Serbia.
Serbia, that's the other one that also has truffles. So I'm getting a ton of truffles. I think it was just a really great marketing ploy a couple hundred years ago is why people really think that the Alba white truffles are a big deal. But my impact that I got is that you can get a whole bunch of different kinds of flavors and textures and end results from the same place. I think it's really just up to the truffle.
So there's almost like there's a whole exploration just in that single question of the different flavors, textures from a single place.
We're talking dozens of different flavors and smells from the same place, harvested at the same time.
Wow. And tell us about when you said that, not to slam Oregon, because you got a California winery on the line, so we're not doing that. But
No.
No, explain to us. I had to get that little poke in just for fun. No, but explain to us what it was about or is about the Oregon truffles that you've tasted that didn't work for you.
Well, the thing about the Oregon truffles is I don't have a guy coming to my back door with Oregon truffles for me to taste through. Whereas I have a guy from Tennessee giving me that opportunity for that learning experience. So it could have just been my truffle sales guy was messing with me and gave me maybe not the best quality, or just said, hey, give her those because they're big, or whatever it was. So I'm assuming that the Oregon truffles are very similar to what the Tennessee truffles were, and that they're very diverse and kind of dynamic in what you get. I just haven't gotten a lot of grape.
Yeah.
So going back to the long view, Dustin, give us a sense before we talk about anything in the long view of wine, of what your communal, your team expectation is for. My expectation might not be unfair, but what you're hoping for in results in what kind of time frame from the orchard?
Yeah, it's going to be at least 6 years before we see any truffle fruiting. So those 6 years are going to be focused on keeping the trees healthy and keeping the soil where it needs to be to make sure that we're giving the truffles the right environment to go through. And for me personally, truffle cultivation, as it's still fairly new, there's not a lot of, it's very close to monocultured growing techniques, because their idea is really get rid of anything that can possibly compete with the truffle and let's focus on that, which me personally, the way I farm and the way I like to do it, that's not what I like at all. And so we're working with Charles Lefevre, who we bought our truffles from, to try and to look into some cover crop techniques and different things that we can do that shouldn't impede the truffles, also should continue to build the soil and create a diverse environment for the trees as well. So,
yeah. And so if I can jump in, it's an interesting, time to talk a little bit about site selection and how that then pivots to the idea of a vineyard. So Dustin, 15 years ago, the first truffle orchard was planted, around 15 years ago, was planted at Blackberry Farm based on knowledge at that time and a site that was available at that time and
yeah.
all of those things. And now, because the trees have a blight and we're finding it, there are some things we need to adjust. You found a different site on property and you've planted a new truffle orchard. So hopefully in the span of 21 years, we might get truffles. Is that the basic picture?
Exactly.
And if we do, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
We'll have these amazing truffles. And we know truffles can grow in Tennessee because of Tom Michaels, who Cassidee mentioned,
Right.
Who proved that great truffles can grow in Tennessee. To me, that it just sounds so much like how wineries must feel and winemakers must feel, and kind of speaks to the bravery that it takes to get into that business, where you might pick a site and plant vines and then find out half a generation later that that wasn't the right site, or that it was the right site and you've done everything right. And Ted, I'm just always interested in this topic that, you get one chance a year to make wine from a site. And that might be 3 to 5 years into, selecting and planting that site. And just what is the process? I mean, we're talking about the long view here and almost, how does that even make sense? Like, what drives you to do that? And how do you pick a site and how do you decide that it's the right way to do it? And if you want to even dive into the pivot vineyard at some point, which we're tasting here, I'd be interested. A lot of topics there, but to me, they sound similar. Like, plant an orchard, you wait half a generation, maybe things work out. It seems similar with a vineyard to me, but maybe I'm wrong.
The big advantage we have over Dustin and anybody else who's trying to do the truffles, right, is that we do have over 100 years of experience with Vitis vinifera in the United States. What's a really interesting parallel, and Dustin, I don't wish this on you, but if you think about the attempts to grow vinifera on the East Coast, they were utter failures for well over 100 years, right? Most of what was planted immediately succumbed to phylloxera. If it didn't go down to native phylloxera, you know, all the other horrible molds and diseases we get on the East Coast, because you have a rainy, humid summer, were problematic for this tender European species. So there was a long, long period of disappointment, and Thomas Jefferson wrote about his great disappointment, right, in not being able to grow vinifera, and his hope that someday the United States would be able to do so successfully. So there's that commonality. But I think for us, Andy, a couple of things come to mind that's really different from what Dustin is dealing with. And one is that in viticulture, you've been to many great vineyard sites in Europe. And I've been to a few, and I've worked on a few. And I think that you can get in your mind a picture of what a potentially great vineyard site is. And it's an intuitive picture, but of course there's a rational basis to it. Exposure, wind direction, rock content of the soil, all those things. And you can walk onto a site and say, this smells right. It's literally, it's like something out of the kitchen, Cassidee. Literally, it's like an olfactory thing. This just smells like this is going to work. And you can use the grasses and the native vegetation. I think that's very important. That's something I learned later in my career, right, was to be identifying the types of grasses that are growing. Obviously, in our environment in California, it would be a different species you'd be looking for if you were in Oregon or somewhere else. But those things all matter. And I think you can use them without ever having any bit of soil analysis. And that's the great quality of vines, is that they're extremely adaptable and flexible. The only limitation to that, of course, are certain types of insects, etc., nematodes, which if you have the wrong nematode species, you know, blah, 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 it doesn't work. So there are limitations, but there's a lot of flexibility there. And then it's a, you know, everybody in this conversation loves and knows European cuisine and wine. And so we've all got a collective, shared experience that helps us to understand what a great wine is that comes from a place, meaning it has the signature, right, Andy? It's like it's signed its place on the bottom. And those are the sites we're looking for, right? We're looking for the ones that are going to really be distinctive. Now, do you know that? Of course not. You never know that.
Yeah. And do you, you know, you don't know it, Ted, you know, like, so, and, you know, you're out in the Sonoma coast. I mean, do you have any examples of, I hate to ask this, I mean, but we jumped off with an example of our failures. I think, do you have anything that just didn't work for you and you were so hopeful for, and then it, you know,
I have a couple. Rachel's going to share a picture, but before we get to the picture, just a really quick story about it, which is we have a site in Anderson Valley, which is called Cerriz Vineyard, which was a planting contract. It's at the inland end of Anderson Valley, the warmer end. Very steep, rocky site. So I walked out onto this site and I looked at it and I really liked the site, and we signed up and agreed with the owner and the clones, rootstock, parcel, you know, all these good things. And I was biting my fingernails, Andy, after that for about 3 years, because I said, oh my gosh, and this is a completely practical thing, which both Cassidee in the kitchen and Dustin will understand, which is like, I wonder if I've just really made a big mistake, because we're going to have to be, you know, cleaning the crusher and harvesting this darn site 3 weeks before anything else, right? Warmer location, low yields, rocky, stressed soils. Maybe this is a big mistake. I was completely wrong, Andy, and I couldn't see that at the time. Cerriz ends up being a moderately late site. Why? Because it's right in the fog zone. So even on the days that it's not foggy, you're at 800 feet, right where the cool air comes in. So it just doesn't bud out early. It buds out later than you would think. And it just, the whole physiological cycle is pushed back. So, I mean, it was a relief to see I was wrong, but you know, those are the things, some of those things, it's really the roll of the dice.
Yeah. And that is interesting, the factors you might not anticipate, it's sort of like they say, like you're buying a house or something, you should visit it at different times of day to see, the traffic going to be bad and then,
Yeah.
type of a thing. And I think, vineyards and orchard sites and such are kind of like that. We had a question come in that I know we wanted to touch on, and Dustin touched on it about monoculture. And Dustin, you said, you almost need monoculture in a private orchard. And it's not the way you love to farm. You're trying to figure things out. But Ted, how does monoculture work in a vineyard? I think when I picture a great vineyard site, picture, a living, breathing, mass of like a biosphere unto itself. Is monoculture something that is a bad word? Is it something that you don't want, something you do want? What's the idea there? And really even, bring it down a notch and like, what does monoculture look like in a vineyard and in a truffle orchard?
Yeah, I think, of course, Dustin, my antenna went up when you made that mention of this problem, right? In terms of dealing with the European species that you want to introduce to the States. Not you introducing, but grow with other people in the States. So that was really interesting to me. And Andy, that we chose over many years to go a really different way in terms of farming biodynamically and having lots of cover crops. And I think everybody can see that picture of the Cerriz Vineyard with that's under Rachel's signature that shows a lot of different species. What's specifically in that picture in the close range is calendula, is the orange flower, and then alyssum, which is a host for all kinds of beneficial insects. So we opted that direction as much as possible. I think that's really important. But we're in a summer dry climate. So in August and September, you can say you've got diversity, but most things are dormant in California, right? So
dormant is such a nice word.
That's right. So you're not going to see that then, but it's something that really is important to us. And what we're going to try to do is see if we can find the picture of the haven, because I want to speak to the mistakes. So Rachel's going to find her way to a picture of a little replant in the haven if we can find it. There we go. Thanks, Rachel. So this is the haven was planted using, for lack of a better word, traditional consultants, Dustin, right? People who spend their lives advising wineries on soil composition, what rootstocks they should grow, potentially whatever varieties they should grow. And this was 2000, right? So this is now 20 years ago, with the best, quote unquote, cutting edge consultants of the time. And this is a section of the haven that you wouldn't think so looking at it now, but this is about as big as the cover crop ever gets in the spring. Doesn't matter how much rainfall you get. So this is a very rocky, gravelly, red soiled vineyard. And the consultants, which I went along with, so I'm not throwing them under the bus, I'm throwing me under the bus too on this, guys, wanted us to plant a European rootstock, which was low vigor, which, is well known in Burgundy. I mean, you can all get the picture of sort of the traditional high quality thinking that goes into it. And by age 20, these vines were giving up the ghost. I mean, they did not have the oomph to deal with the dry California climate, the amount of rock in this soil. And so all of the rootstock in the foreground of the picture, which is painted with blue to indicate the type of rootstock, has all been replanted now. So we're just giving up the ghost on that section, Andy. We were getting a couple of clusters per vine, but at that rate, it's got a different ripening curve. It's not, the vines in the background are a little more vigorous. It's just a problem managing it. And so we're just biting the bullet and going back in with other stocks now. It's not worth trying to, and maybe we won't get that much more fruit. Maybe you get 4 clusters instead of 2. Who knows? You never know that stuff, but at least it's an attempt to find a better balance. And in terms of managing different rootstocks in the row, well, so be it. They'll work it out. I mean, that's been my experience since then, having done this many times, whereas most consultants would tell you never to do that.
Huh. And let me ask you both a yield question, if I can. So you mentioned 2 to 4 clusters, I'm not sure, even having visited a lot of vineyards, what a vine produces. And I'm not, I think we all have this idea of vineyards and fruit and everything, but Ted, for you, the pivot vineyard, for instance, what's the yield? And how does that work? And when does it make sense for you?
So every site is going to be really different. And you can go to vigorous soils in any region will produce higher crops. And because we're blessed in California with dry summers, there's areas of the Russian River that can produce 3 or 4 times what we can produce easily at the Haven. But the Haven produces less than the pivot. The Haven is kind of a 2 ton per acre vineyard, which is modest by any stand. Actually, it's not even 2. I shouldn't say that because that's a bumper crop. It's more like 1.5 tons per acre. And then the yield per vine, of course, depends on the density you plant. So if you plant a lot more vines, you're going to have lesser fruit weight per vine. If you have less vines, you'll have more fruit weight per vine. But the pivot does better. The pivot is just one of those sweet spots where the weather never gets too extreme. And so, we're really fortunate at the pivot. It's a much more consistent yielding place. So, if you're a grower, you want to own the pivot. If you don't want to own the Haven. That's a mistake as a grower. You don't want to do that.
Do you own them both?
Yeah, you own them both.
Tell us specifically about the pivot, Ted. Where is it exactly?
Sure. This is the estate parcel where the winery is, and this was really, this is a wine farm. 30 acres, 3 acres of vines planted on it. The goal was really to do something much more like a traditional farm and to support it with the compost, etc. That makes health. And picture of me with the animals in the vineyard. That's primitive Shetland sheep, a really hardy, self-sufficient breed of sheep. Good birthers, no problem on birthing. You can see that she's full grown. They're small stature. These are not large sheep.
Yeah.
But they eat almost more like a goat than a sheep. And we don't milk them, Dustin, although, I've been tempted. I'm not sure the yield per ewe is very high with these guys.
So what do you use them for? They clean the bottoms of the vine and the cover crop? Why do you have them in the vineyard?
So we just got into March, and of course, right now it will soon, when the vines bud out, will be frost season. So they're eating down the cover crop. So you have good airflow under the vine, so you don't, your chance of frost is less. And of course, their droppings are fertilizing the vines and the field. So over time, we've reduced the amount of compost we add per acre dramatically at the pivot because the sheep droppings are so effective instead.
Oh.
So it's a big factor.
Ted, you mentioned tons per acre of fruit. I hear that all the time when I visit wineries, this much per acre kind of a thing. And in the back of my mind, I don't have a good equation for what that means in terms of bottles of wine. When someone says, it was super low yielding vineyard or whatever, and then they throw out a ton per acre, and I'm like, oh, that's neat. I mean, to me, I don't have this equation in the back of my mind. I think it'd be interesting. I know for me personally, I would assume for some people on this conference that what 2 tons per acre? What does that mean? Generally speaking.
Yeah, in really round terms, it means about 60 cases of 12 bottles, 12 750s. So 2 times 120 cases per acre would be a really, what you do with it, you fraction off some as press wine or whatever, who knows, but just the gross yield would be somewhere around 120 cases per acre.
120 cases. And 120 cases is in barrels, like 5 barrels, 4 to 5 barrels of wine.
Yeah, and that's, now you're talking winemaker talk, right? Because this is the way we think in the middle of the madness, which is about 2.7 barrels per ton. Yeah.
Per ton. Okay, so when someone says a ton, I think we can all picture, a barrel. So a ton is almost 3 barrels of wine. Okay. So
and then there's one last thing that Rachel brought up that we wanted to talk to you about for the long view, which is that picture of the tagged vines that Rachel will bring. pivot. So this is the pivot, and there's us night picking it, but she's going to find. Yes, the rootstock tag on vine, I think, Rachel. There we go. Perfect. So not only is the long view the question of planting a site and waiting, there's also, of course, the selection of material at the very most basic level. Andy, as you know, there's the variety, but then of course there's clones or selections of Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or any other variety you're planting. And they are incredibly important. And this picture is it's a section of the pivot, which if you can go back there just for a second, Rachel, I just want to point this out because you and I notice it, but some people may not notice it. You can see all these metal tags on the vines. So each of these vines in these 7 rows has a particular history. And they are a particular clone on a particular rootstock from a particular place. So now if we go to that individual vine, poor Rachel, we're really putting her on the spot with this, but that's okay. We're all amateurs. It's a close-up of the actual tag. A little hard to read, but if I start at the top, there's PN96. So PN96 is a Chabot selection of Pinot Noir from one of the old original Chabot plantings in the Gavilon Mountains. Then NYL E13, okay, is the NYL is the mother vineyard it came from. E13 is the row, and V6 is the vine. So now we know what the specific mother vine was that this came from, and all of the history of that. And then on the second row, XOR tells us that instead of being grafted onto a rootstock, that's an own-rooted vine.
Cool.
So there's a whole process of maintaining this information, taking samples from the vines, trying to learn from it, and then determining, is this plant material we want to use? Much like, I'm sure, Dustin, you're asking yourself all the time, do I have the right species to grow these truffles on, or should I be looking at a bunch of other things, or which oak type are right? It's the same basic problem. And there's a little snapshot. These are all similar, the same original origin vine, and says unrooted. You can see one got replaced with a 5 BB rootstock. And then what we've done after that is we've gone to, I'm going to make this up, that vine number 8, and said, that's the best producing of the individual progeny that we've gathered. And that's the one that we multiply if we're interested in it. So you can do the math pretty quickly. If it takes 3 to 5 years to get the vine to maturity, and you've got 3 or 4 generations of selections, just like, Dustin said, you're out at 20 years to really think that you've got what you want.
It's amazing. And then I guess another 3 years before you realize what you harvested to the bottle, so to speak. And we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to dive into food, and I want to bring this all back to the table, if we can. And so Cass, well, I'm not sure Ted or Cassidee first, but maybe Cassidee, if you can dive in. So let's say we have truffles 6 years from now. We have these amazing black Perigord, truffles that we've harvested. What do you do with truffles? How do you use them?
Okay, so again, I don't cook them. I finish dishes with truffles. So like the grit recipe that you have, you want to, right before you serve it, we're talking moments, grate the truffle into the grits, and then let the warmth of the truffle or the grits open up the truffle, and then grate more truffle on top. And it's this aromatic kind of smell that you're looking for and taste. So I don't actually cook truffles. I garnish and finish with them.
You add them to things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I remember, Cassidee, when I just left culinary school and I was trying to get a job. It's a job I didn't get, probably because of it. And they gave me like this mystery basket of things to cook. and it was like a chicken and some rice, some other things, and there was a black truffle in there, and I had no idea what it was because I'd never seen it before in culinary school. And Courtney put up a photo of the like these 3 black truffles. They're like these gnarly looking things, and I peeled it and cleaned it, and then I peeled it, and then I boiled it because
Nice.
I know I hope they
Yeah.
it was a terrific experience for me. And then I did some studying afterwards and realized, because you can see, like, I didn't know, and so, it was dirty and obviously come out of the ground. And so you clean it, you keep them dry, and you shave it really, really thin on like hot, starchy stuff. That's how you're supposed to do it, right?
Yeah, that's what really like elevates the truffle. Yeah.
It's more of an
But
aromatic.
like, okay, if you're looking at these truffles here, there's a bit of a blemish on the larger one, and that's likely from where they were digging it up or possibly cleaning it. And you can see the textures of the truffle, and they have all these little nooks and crannies that are perfect for holding in mud and dirt, which is, I think, why people used to peel them, because that used to be a thing. I remember that from culinary school. But now you just take an old toothbrush and clean them off.
Yeah.
And can you say a few more words about handling them, just for all of us? Like, you get a truffle, do you put it in the refrigerator? Is that the worst thing to do? What temperature do you like to have them at before you actually grate them or serve them? Give us some of the background on the basics.
Okay, if you're gonna store the truffle for a couple of days, you can wrap it in a dry paper towel and put it in a Ziploc bag or some Tupperware. Kind of keep the oxygen low on that. And then I do like to pull my truffles out and get them to room temperature before I use them. I think that it's just like certain wines at different temperatures. The smell definitely comes out at different times. But I would, before you wrap them up, clean them, get them clean and where you want them. And then they can last, as long as they stay dry and you change out that paper towel, for about 2 weeks.
Got you.
So does that mean there's a big Blackberry staff party at the end if they're not all used up? Or there's no chance they're getting any?
No.
They get shaved.
No.
Cassidee, I think, you and me and Dustin, and, some people are familiar with grits. And I see someone on our webinar chat, so they just finished cooking the grits, and they're so good with the truffles. But tell us a little bit about grits. How do you cook them? I think maybe if anyone saw My Cousin Vinny, there's that famous line about instant grits. In that movie, might be dating myself in that.
Yeah. Sure. Okay,
tell us about grits.
I'm kind of a grit. I'm a bit of a grit snob. I wasn't raised with grits, so I've only learned about them in my adult life. But I like to take the corn, the dried corn, and grind it right before I cook it. Just like coffee, I feel like you get a better flavor and aroma and sweetness from a freshly ground grit than something that's been ground for months, if not a year. And then I like to keep it pretty simple, a mixture of water and milk. And then you have to cook them real slow for quite some time, depending on the grind of your grit. And then I like to finish them with more butter than you're comfortable consuming.
And then you spoon them and then shave truffles on them. And
yeah, but I will say a little trick that I have picked up over the years: if you squeeze just a little bit of lemon, once you grate your truffles into the grits, that acidity balances with the fat and the earthiness, and it kind of opens up the truffle in a way that I've not had before with another preparation.
And sometimes you use lemon. Sometimes I've seen you use even orange, which I think is really good with black truffles too.
Yeah, orange is good too.
What about, Cassidee, any other non-traditional uses of the truffle that you've had fun playing with in combinations in the barn?
I actually have a dish on right now. I harvest shagbark off of the shagbark hickory tree. And then I take that and I make a syrup out of it. And then I use that syrup to barbecue celery root. You following me so far? And then I take rutabaga and I smoke it. Like I smoke the living hell out of it. And then I make a smoked rutabaga broth. And then I take the hickory syrup barbecued celery root. And then I grate a little bit of orange zest over it, a tremendous amount of black truffle. And then you pour the smoked rutabaga broth over the top. And the second it hits that orange zest and the truffle, it just hits your face. And it's sexy. It's a sexy dish. Yeah.
This is brutal. I don't know if I can take that description. I'm gonna live through that one.
Just like mom used to make, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just a couple of quick questions. I want to bring it all back together with the wine too, but opinion question. I saw we had a question, sliced versus grated truffles, Dustin, Cassidee. I mean, I saw two different photos. One was this like microplane, thing, and the other was the traditional like sliced thin truffle. Opinion?
Grated.
Graded. Dustin?
Yeah. If you're going to fold it in, grate it for sure. If you want it to look expensive, slice it.
Okay. So
I do like the grate. I have noticed that you can go through a truffle very quickly on a microplane as well.
You can.
And then, so Ted, one of the things here, we have Pinot on the table. Hopefully you have truffles and grits and these Pinots as well. But what's the idea about Pinot and truffles?
I was going to ask you that, Andy.
Well, I have my own opinion. It's one of the only places I've ever harvested wild truffles is Burgundy. The other place is the Southern Rhone Valley. And so, Pinot Noir and Grenache to me are great pairings with black truffles. And then in Italy, Nebbiolo and the wines of the Marche, the indigenous wines of the Marche, I really love with white truffles. But to me, it's that grows together, goes together. If you have truffles, then you should have the grapes that grow where truffles would naturally grow. And we sort of, in our country, we sometimes, you force it. You have Pinot Noir from California and truffles, hopefully from Tennessee. But the idea is the same, that Pinot and black truffles, just like Burgundy and black truffles.
Yeah.
Plus, I would have Littorai Pinot with, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Frankly, it's one of my favorite wines. So,
well, I think on the truffle front, what I would say, because I did notice there was a question on the 18 versus the 15 with the truffles. Yeah. I think my take, and Andy, we sent the two wines to you guys all. Everybody
we have them. Yeah.
Green has had the two. So like Dustin, you're well. Dustin's a chef too. Everybody, in case you didn't know that, so he's got quite a background. You guys can all disagree with me, but my take on it would be that for Pinot to really work with truffles, you have to have something that's a little older or a little earthier vintage. In other words, Pinot, when it's young and it's fruity and you've got all this bright cherry or slightly underripe rhubarb tones or cranberry, that's all great, but that's really not the truffle spectrum. It's got to get into the earthy tones that you get with, 5 or 6 or even 10 or 15 years of age. And then it really, really becomes a good match, just like older Nebbiolo or whatever. But for me, when they're young, it's almost a no-go. So that's why I wanted to do 18 versus 15, because the 18s are just babies, right? Probably a longer lifetime expectancy for that vintage, but right now they're that adolescent kid you had, at that moment when you were out in public with them and you really, really didn't want to be there and listen to what he had to say. That's where 18 is now, but 15's, a much less, much more concentrated vintage in terms of tons per acre, more earthy, more kind of, funky. I don't know if does that make sense to you, Andy?
Yeah, to me it does, and I tend to agree. And Ted, for the three panelists at Blackberry, actually opened an even older Littorai from 2001 for us, just for our own nerdy, reasoning to see older, Pinot Noir, and I think it would be a really fun wine with truffles too.
I was gonna say this would be my pick.
Andy, which did you open?
We opened a Hirsch Vineyard 2001 that you made, and I think when I poured it for Dustin, he said, I didn't even know they were making wine in 01.
Yeah.
But you know,
93, Dustin, long time ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful, and it has great fruit and earthiness, and you can tell it has some beautiful age, and it's just really fun to see. I mean, Pinot Noir from our country, with some serious age, and it's part of what we do at Blackberry beyond just the Truffle Orchard. I mean, we have wines that we are aging in our cellar from makers like you, Ted, and others that are great in this world. You know, to show what wines with some great cellar age can really have. But it's fun. I mean, you have this young baby 18, you know, you have this 15, and then, I mean, you go back another 14 years with it. I know a different vineyard, but to really see some evolution. But I always think of wine, you know, it's not like a time capsule. It's not like you're the same person in 01 that you were in 15 and 18. So your winemaking has changed, and your you know, desire of what you'll get out of the wine, you know, has changed over the years. And maybe if we can kind of end there, Ted, with what, I mean, the future for you, you know, what style of wine do you want to make? What has changed for you over the years, and where do you see the future going for you in your wines?
So I think the lead into that for me is a analogy with cooking, which is the thing that is difficult for me personally. Maybe it's not for other winemakers, but the thing that's difficult for me in winemaking, and the reason people talk about the crush as being such a big deal, is the analogy I make is that if Cassidee was given only one time in her life to cook salmon, she gets one piece of fish, and you got to get it right, because there's not a second piece of fish. You can't turn down that piece of fish and say, I'm grabbing the next slice and this one will work out better. Because, as you know, Andy, there's no second fish in winemaking. Every vintage is different. The tannin profiles, everything is completely different. So you have the background of working with the same varieties, but it really does truly change. And so that's why the pressure of harvest for a lot of us feels pretty significant. And you know, you feel like if I get to cook the fish 40 times in a career, that's a pretty good career in the wine business, you know. So I guess that's, you know, hopefully the more fish I can cook, the better I'll get. I'll never get to be Cassidee's level, but at least I can get somewhere near it, you know, in winemaking. So that's the way I think of it. And then I think there's a part of me, and maybe this can be brought back to you, Dustin, in a way, as a question or a provocation for you. I also am really aware in our farming and our winemaking that I don't want it to be about me or us. It's really, you know, just like Blackberry has an identity beyond all of us on this call, Littorai should too. Hopefully we'll get there, and we'll, you know, there'll be future generations of Littorai. And so it's not so much about me. It's more, how can I make something that when Andy and Dustin and Cassidee taste it, say, wow, that's a classic Hirsch, or that's a classic Haven, or that's a classic Pivot. That's what I want to do, you know. And whether it's, you know, the dark and inky that some critic wants, who cares about that? What I care about is those of us who are true wine and food professionals in our own love of place. And I think Blackberry expresses a lot of that.
Very much so.
I love that. And Ted, I guess, you know, if you're taking the chef analogy, you know, your desire for the way you want to cook fish changes. You know, you might have liked it well done one time in the past, and now you like it, you know, at a medium, and it's okay to change, you know. And I think just knowing that, you know, nothing is set, and it's all sort of this slippery time capsule kind of a thing. You know, there's a moment in time, but it's not preserved exactly the way we always think. Well, I think we've kind of gone through, as quickly as it went, we've gone through an hour of time here, and if not a little more. But I wanted to take a few moments, just if we have some more Q&A to answer. I'm seeing some people that are enjoying some great, it's like Hirsch wines, or some Littorai Hirsch 15 and 13. I'm seeing some people saying, Cassidee, we got a question. I want to answer just a few of the Q&As if I can. We got a question, Cassidee, about white or yellow grits, or does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. They're the same
If
as long
it's
as
purple or blue or red, doesn't matter.
Got you. I think, Ted, you answered the question about the 15 and the 18 vintages. That was a quick question we had. Any other questions from anybody? Any other thoughts from Dustin, Cassidee, or Ted? No.
I think I have a last question for Dustin, if I can provoke him a little bit. You're spending a lot of time and effort and group sweat to make this go, without knowing, what the success of the orchard will be. Where's the sense of satisfaction in the short term for you? What makes you get up the next day and charge back out there to keep working on it?
For me, it's the little things, the little learns, the little wins. They always say the little things make up a great life, and it's very true with this as well. I love seeing what compaction or different things with the way we treat the soil, whether we drive the tractor across the field once versus twice, or how many passes we go when we're mowing, or whether we use a weed eater or a flame weeder, or whether we rototill versus not rototill, whether we irrigate, all those little things. In fact, I was eyeing all your pictures, and I didn't get to ask you, but I wanted to know more about your irrigation things, because it looked like you had drip on one and sprayers on another, and like those little things, those little lessons that I get to learn along the way. And to me, it's more than getting truffles. I mean, of course I want to get truffles and I want that to be the end goal, but learning and figuring out all the little things along the way and seeing what minute details change the bigger picture over the long term, that's what excites me.
Awesome. I see a few more questions just coming. Cassidee, does the size of the grind of grit matter? I think you said something about this, but.
Yeah. The larger the grind, the longer it's going to take to cook. And the lower your heat needs to be. I would do a large grind, start it on the stove and get everything incorporated and a bit thickened, and then cover it and put it in an oven.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and it looks like there's just one more question we haven't answered, and it was to you, Ted. I guess they have the pivot in front of them, but they own some Haven. And I don't know if you want to throw out just a quick descriptor of the different vineyards that you make and what have you. But the question was specifically the difference between Haven and Pivot.
Yeah, I think just in a nutshell, the way I would describe it is that the Pivot is the wine that is more in its youthful, in the sort of thinking of Blackberry Farm, Blackberry aromatic end of the spectrum, and fresher fruit, and takes a little while to develop the secondary characters. A little higher acid in general, whether we perceive it on the palate or not. Technically, it's a little higher acid than the Haven. The Haven may be a little more, a little less upfront, a little more subtle. Lovely sweetness, and the tannins kick in late on that wine. It's a wine that, Andy, we can usually identify blind in most tastings simply by when the tannin hits your palate. So you take a sip and you roll it around, you don't notice the tannin, you go, oh, this is a really soft, seductive wine. And then all of a sudden at the end of that same mouthful, you're going, oh, wait a minute, no, there's a lot more hidden tannin there than I realized. So it has a sort of hidden tannin signature.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'll just speak hopefully for all the attendees, because I feel like I was kind of a fly on the wall here, listening to some really intelligent people bring everything together. But Dustin, Ted, Cassidee, thank you all for talking about this long view of orchards and vineyards and wine, and how it comes together, Cassidee, at the table. And then, thank you all for doing what you're doing. I know it takes a lot of bravery to step out on a 20-year project, not knowing what you're going to get or if you'll get anything. And I'm so glad that you all do that. So thank you from me, and thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to all the attendees. I thought it was a fun discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for doing this with us. We're grateful to everybody at Blackberry and Cassidee to, get on the line and listen to you. I don't get to listen to chefs as much as you might imagine, so it's been a real treat. So thank you all for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.